On a quiet road in the state of Georgia, two police officers pulled over a black woman driving alone, expecting the usual compliance. She looked ordinary, spoke with a calm voice, and wore nothing that revealed rank or authority. But Maya Collins was far from just another driver. They planted drugs in her trunk, laughed as they cuffed her, and dragged her to the station under fabricated charges. To them, it was just another routine setup. But within a few hours, those smug smiles would vanish. Because Maya was the director of the United States Drug Enforcement Administration, DEA, and in arresting her, they hadn't just made a mistake, they had unwittingly cracked open the rotting system that had protected them for years. Before we go any further, let us know where in the world you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you definitely won't want to miss. Some power hides behind a uniform. Others, far more dangerous, hide in silence, like a fuse waiting to ignite. That morning in Georgia was unusually quiet. Along a winding road flanked by damp pine trees, Maya Collins guided her silver sedan through the thick mist, which draped the asphalt like a heavy curtain. The previous night's rain had left glistening streaks on the pavement, reflecting the overcast sky as if the earth itself were quietly weeping. She wasn't dressed like a high-ranking federal official. No badge. No government car. No escort. Just a 43-year-old black woman with a neatly tied low bun, a zipped gray jacket, and a simple pair of jeans. On the seat beside her, her phone rested silently in a cup holder next to a lukewarm paper cup of coffee. The past 3 days had been a rare dose of peace after months of relentless pressure. Visiting her sister in Macon, she'd lived like a normal person, baking with her niece, watching old movies, chatting about trivial things. No classified files. No emergency calls. No DEA. This return trip to D.C. should have been just as peaceful, until a patrol car suddenly appeared behind her, flashing red and blue. A sharp siren pierced the morning air. Maya immediately slowed and pulled over. She wasn't panicking. This wasn't her first encounter with police. But this time was different. She wasn't overseeing the situation from behind a desk. She was in their crosshairs. Her window rolled down as a white officer approached. Tall, with a polite smirk but cold eyes. His hand rested unnecessarily on his holstered gun, a silent message. "Good morning. License and registration, ma'am." "Of course," Maya said evenly, handing the documents through the gap. The officer didn't take them immediately. Instead, he scanned the inside of the car, as if searching for something else. Behind her, a second officer, younger, wearing sunglasses, stepped out of the patrol car and walked around to the trunk. "Where you headed this early?" "Returning to Washington after visiting family," Maya replied. Her tone was calm, but internally she was on alert. A cold wind swept through. Maya sensed a shift in the atmosphere. This was a script they'd performed many times before. Then came the expected line. "We detected a strange odor. Please step out of the vehicle." Maya's heart pounded. She'd heard those words dozens of times, not directed at her, but in cases she'd investigated. It was always the opening act of an abuse of power. "You don't have probable cause to search my vehicle," she said. The officer smirked. "We suspect illegal substances." "You resisting?" Maya opened the door. Not out of submission, but because she knew the law better than they did. Any resistance would only escalate their excuse. She stepped out, hands visible, eyes locked on them. Minutes later, the second officer opened the trunk. He pulled out a sealed plastic bag, white, thick, tightly knotted. "A large quantity of suspected cocaine," he announced, loudly, as if performing for a hidden camera. Maya said nothing. Not from fear, but because she knew the truth always had its moment. And that moment was coming. "You're under arrest for possession of a Schedule I controlled substance." They cuffed her. Cold steel. Too tight. Her federal badge remained tucked inside the purse on the passenger seat. She didn't need it. Not yet. This time, she wanted to witness the system operate without knowing who they were truly dealing with. And as Maya was placed in the back of the cruiser, she closed her eyes. Not from fatigue, but to commit every detail to memory. Rowan County Police Station was a small, worn-down building with chipped brick walls, a crooked roof, and dusty glass doors. It stood in the middle of a town so small it could fit in the palm of your hand, a place where authority wasn't governed by law, but by habit. When the police car pulled into the lot, Maya was still in handcuffs. She was pulled out like a criminal, though she had offered no resistance. The two officers exchanged looks, as if they'd just won a familiar game. "Put her in room 3, one of them muttered. Maya walked without hesitation. Each step was steady, as though she was leading, not being led. But inside, she was observing every hallway, every nameplate, every face. The interrogation room was a square space with cold gray walls and flickering fluorescent lights that made her skin appear pale. On the table sat an empty file folder, clear evidence the charade had been premeditated. Two officers sat across from her, ready to play the roles of interrogator and executioner. "What's your name?" one asked gruffly. "Maya Collins," she replied, eyes unblinking. "Date of birth?" "September 4th, 1981. "Occupation?" She paused briefly, then enunciated each word with precision. "Director of the United States Drug Enforcement Administration." A moment of silence. Then both officers burst into laughter, a loud, derisive cackle. "Huh! You hear that, Joe? We've got ourselves the DEA director." Maya didn't respond. She knew exactly what was happening, and that she didn't need to prove anything. Words at this point would only feed their arrogance. "You think that line's gonna save you? This is Georgia, not D.C., one officer sneered, voice laced with threat. She simply stared at them, so calm it unsettled them. Her phone had been confiscated, but it was equipped with a tracking device. And she knew, at any moment, Washington would realize something was wrong. Maya leaned back in her chair and closed her eyes once more. Not from weariness, but to wait patiently for the moment of reversal. Behind those dingy gray walls, a storm was gathering, and when it broke, none of them would be ready for it. At the headquarters of the United States Drug Enforcement Administration, DEA, in Washington, D.C., the operations room was still lit despite the early morning hour. On the massive central screen, real-time signals of senior agents were displayed, and one of them, labeled MC001, had not moved for nearly 2 hours. Jordan Lee, Special Assistant to Director Maya Collins, furrowed his brow as he stared at the fixed signal located in a tiny town in Georgia. No one was ever supposed to disable tracking during duty hours, especially not the DEA director. "She never goes dark for more than an hour," Jordan muttered, pulling up the location's registry. "Rowan County Police Department." He didn't call the station. He called the Deputy Attorney General. Within 15 minutes, a federal-level response chain was activated. The Department of Justice, the Office of the Inspector General, and the DEA's Legal Rapid Response Unit all received red alert notifications. In another office within DEA headquarters, Nora Valdez, head of Internal Affairs, ordered an immediate request for any available surveillance footage from Rowan County Police Station. At the same time, an urgent memo was dispatched to the Georgia governor's office. The first call from Washington to Georgia didn't come from a press office. It came from the Civil Rights Division. And the message was unambiguous. A senior federal officer has been unlawfully detained. The actions of the Rowan officers will be subject to immediate federal investigation. Meanwhile, at that tiny police station, the two officers still had no idea that what they were doing wasn't just abuse of power. It was triggering a federal investigation that could destroy their careers and cost them their freedom. Still smug, still unaware that the legal clock was already ticking. And in a locked room, Maya Collins, her hand still cuffed, opened her eyes. Quietly. Those eyes weren't just seeing the walls around her. They were tracking the machinery behind the veil of authority that had begun to move. She didn't need to shout. She didn't need to resist. She knew, once the gears of justice started turning, they wouldn't stop, and this time, they would crush the rot those men thought was invisible. 1 hour after the emergency alert was triggered in Washington, a civilian Bell 429 helicopter lifted off from a federal base in northern Florida, heading straight for Georgia. On board were 4 individuals, 3 federal agents and 1 senior attorney from the Department of Justice. Their mission wasn't to investigate, it was to extract and confront directly. At the same time, in a small office inside the Georgia governor's suite, the phones wouldn't stop ringing. Rachel, the governor's chief aide, received the first fax. Immediate explanation required regarding the arrest of DEA Director Maya Collins. "What?" Rachel gasped, flipping through the pages before jumping to her feet. Meanwhile, at Rowan County Police Station, Maya was still confined in the interrogation room, and the officers continued their psychological game, ignoring her silence. They mocked her identity, accused her of lying, and began drafting fabricated charges. Until the door opened. A man in a gray suit entered, holding a thick folder, followed by a woman wearing a federal badge, her gaze cold as steel. "Where's the sheriff?" the woman asked flatly. The officers looked at each other, confused. One of them asked, "Who are you?" She presented her credentials. "I'm with the Department of Justice's Office of the Inspector General. And the woman you're holding is the Director of the United States DEA." The air in the room froze. "Effective immediately," she continued, "I demand you release her. Any further action on your part will be included in a federal criminal record." A heavy silence fell. The older officer turned to his partner, his face pale. Moments later, Maya's cuffs were removed. But she didn't leave right away. She stood slowly, adjusted her collar, and looked directly into the eyes of the two men who had tormented her for the past hour. "You don't know what you've just done," she said calmly. "But I assure you, you will. No need to yell. No need to threaten." But each word fell like a blade through the air. Outside, the helicopter had just landed, and the world of those two officers was beginning to collapse, not by gunfire or handcuffs, but by truth, law, and a woman who knew no fear. The news spread faster than they had imagined. That noon, as the sun rose high over Rowan Station, black government vehicles began arriving one by one. No sirens. No loudspeakers. Only a chilling silence accompanied by the insignia of real authority. The local media had yet to catch on, but a group of Washington journalists had begun receiving leaked information. A blurry photo showing Maya Collins calmly walking out of the station circulated within the press community. Headlines started forming, "DEA Director illegally detained in Georgia." And within an hour, Maya Collins trended nationwide. At the Georgia governor's office, panic erupted. Legal advisors huddled to discuss damage control, while the communications team scrambled to draft an emergency statement. But no one quite knew how to explain to the public that a black woman, and not just any black woman, but the director of the DEA, had been arrested simply for driving alone through the state. Inside Rowan Station, the two officers, now removed from active duty, sat in an internal holding room. They no longer laughed. No more smug glances. Only deflated silence and vacant stares. A federal attorney entered the room, holding two thick case files. "We have obtained footage from your internal surveillance. It's enough to prosecute both of you for evidence tampering, unlawful detention, and systemic racial profiling." The older officer swallowed hard. "We were just following procedure." "No," the lawyer interrupted coldly. "You weren't following procedure. You were following instinct, and that instinct was prejudice, abuse of power, and disregard for the law." In another meeting room, Maya Collins sat across from representatives from the Department of Justice and the DEA. She had changed into a clean shirt, and a case file lay open on the table. But her eyes remained unchanged, sharp, focused, and unwavering. "Would you like to make a statement to the press?" one agent asked. "Not today," Maya replied. "Today I want peace. But tomorrow we speak. And we won't hold anything back." On the glass wall behind her, sunlight streamed in, casting a glow over her hair. The sun had risen over Rowan Station, but it illuminated more than just the station. It was exposing a system that had thrived in the shadows for far too long. And Maya Collins, the woman they thought was easy prey, was now the alarm bell waking an entire nation. The next day, at exactly 11 a.m., Maya Collins stepped up to the podium at the Department of Justice headquarters in Washington. Dozens of microphones from the nation's leading media outlets pointed directly at her. Behind her stood the flag of the United States and the gleaming emblem of the DEA under the spotlight. She didn't read from a script. Didn't look at notes. Maya stared straight into the lens, into the eyes of millions of Americans watching live. "Yesterday," she began, "was not an isolated incident. It was a mirror reflecting a truth we've grown too used to avoiding." Her voice was neither loud nor harsh, but it rang with the weight of truth. In the room below, not a sound. Even the most seasoned journalists lowered their pens. "I am not the first victim. And sadly, I won't be the last if we continue pretending this system is functioning as it should." She recounted the entire incident calmly and precisely, from the traffic stop, the drugs being planted, the humiliation, to her eventual release. She didn't embellish or dramatize. The truth alone was enough to tighten the hearts of all who listened. Then she paused. Looking directly into the lens, she said, "We cannot continue to allow those who wear uniforms to violate the law, and treat it as normal." She presented 3 clear proposals for reform: independent oversight of all county-level police stations, mandatory continuous recording of all civilian interactions, and codifying racially motivated abuse as a federal offense with defined penalties. This is not just a black issue. It is not an individual issue. It is a national issue, if we still dare to call ourselves a nation of justice. When she stepped down from the podium, the entire room rose in a standing ovation. Not because she was the director of the DEA, but because she had spoken for them, for those who had never been heard. Outside, the media exploded. Major networks like CNN, MSNBC, and Fox News broke the story. Social media erupted. Millions of posts carrying hashtags like #JusticeForMaya and #FixTheSystem flooded every platform. But Maya knew, today was just the beginning. And she didn't come forward to spark a media frenzy. She came forward to start a war. The next morning, a wave of response began emerging from places once assumed to stay silent. The National Police Council held an emergency press conference, during which its chair declared, "The statements made by the DEA director have damaged the image of law enforcement." Several local police unions even publicly criticized Maya, accusing her of fomenting division and distrust toward law enforcement agencies. But in stark contrast, public reaction exploded. Across major cities, thousands of people took to the streets with banners reading, "Maya spoke up, now it's our turn." Law students, veterans, even former police officers joined the marches. They weren't walking just for Maya, but for their own experiences, or the helplessness they had once felt within the system. In Congress, a bipartisan group unexpectedly proposed the formation of a criminal justice reform commission, calling for an investigation into racially biased arrests at the county level. A white representative from Oregon stated, "If a federal director can be set up like this, what chance does the average citizen have?" Meanwhile, Maya resumed her daily work at the DEA as if nothing had happened. But no one at the office looked at her the same way anymore. They no longer saw just a leader. They saw someone who stood up, not for fame, but for truth. That evening, Maya sat alone in her office. Outside, the nation was shifting. But she knew well, systems don't change because of a few speeches or hashtags. They change when people inside them, people like her, keep the flame alive, even when standing before a wall of stone. She opened her laptop and began typing a new email. To all DEA field office directors nationwide. Subject: Action following yesterday. And in her heart, the next chapter no longer belonged to Maya Collins alone. It belonged to everyone who had ever been silenced. 3 days after the groundbreaking press conference, Maya received formal notice. She had been summoned to testify before the Senate Committee on Government Oversight. Officially, it was to clarify the events in Georgia, but Maya knew this was a new political front, where truth would be challenged not by bullets, but by rhetoric, scheming, and the manipulation of public perception. The hearing room that day was packed. Media clustered outside while senators entered one by one, carrying thick folders. Some came to listen. Others, to dismantle. Maya entered, dressed in a deep blue suit. No badge. No insignia. She carried only a copy of the internal investigation report and a pen. She took her seat, head held high. The lights highlighted every feature of her calm yet resolute expression. The chair opened in a solemn tone. "We've summoned you to clarify your role, your actions, and their impact in the Georgia incident. Are you prepared to testify under oath?" "I am," Maya replied. Her voice rang clear and unwavering. The hearing lasted over 3 hours. Some questions targeted her personally. Do you believe you leveraged your position to apply pressure? Do you feel you're damaging the image of law enforcement? But Maya stood firm. She answered each question with logic, with data, and with the experience of someone who had witnessed too much injustice to stay silent any longer. When one aging senator sneered, "And you expect us to believe the police targeted you just because of your skin color?" Maya looked him directly in the eyes, not angry, only steady. Not because of my skin color, but because this system is too used to never being questioned. And I'm simply the first of many who will say that aloud." The room fell silent. The air tightened like a drawn string. A few journalists typed furiously. Even her harshest critics grew more cautious. After the hearing, as Maya exited the Capitol building, the afternoon sunlight cast a soft glow on her shoulders. An older brown-skinned woman stood waiting. She didn't speak, just gently took Maya's hand and nodded. No words were needed. Only a continuation. And Maya understood, this fight was no longer about her. It was about the right to exist, to be respected, and to be protected as a citizen, no matter who you are, where you're from, or the color of your skin. That evening, in a private suite at a high-end hotel in D.C., 5 men in dark suits sat around a round table. No recordings. No aides. They were political strategists, former cabinet officials, and a senator up for re-election. Midterms are in 2 weeks. If we let Maya Collins keep speaking, she'll shift the entire narrative. She's being seen as a symbol of justice, another added. And worse, she can't be attacked directly without creating backlash. They began crafting strategies, digging into her personal history, dragging her into petty controversies to blur her message, and if needed, using divide-and-conquer tactics, planting dissenters from within her own community to publicly criticize her. Meanwhile, Maya received an anonymous email. The subject line had only one word: careful. Inside was a leaked transcript from a meeting held by an extremist political organization. Her name was mentioned. There was a roadmap. Jordan Lee, Maya's assistant, immediately activated internal security protocols. "They're not just trying to discredit you," he said. "They want to make you a symbol of failure, to send a message to anyone else who dares to rise." But Maya didn't back down. She appeared at a panel discussion at Howard University, where students questioned her not just about policy, but about fear, about faith, and how to keep the fire alive when everything around you feels cold. She answered, "Of course I'm afraid. But I won't let fear make silence speak for me." At the end of the event, a student stepped forward, placed a hand gently on her shoulder, and said, "We need you. Not just for this chapter, but for the one that comes next." And Maya knew, even as the undercurrents gathered force, she would not retreat. Because behind her now was more than a title. It was a generation rising with truth. On what seemed like an ordinary morning, Maya had just stepped into her office when Jordan burst in, his face pale. "You need to see this," he said, handing her a tablet. On the screen was a leaked video, skillfully edited, splicing Maya's testimony before Congress with footage of riots and violent clashes, overlaid with the caption, "DEA Director Fueling Division in America?" This wasn't an amateur production. It was professionally crafted, backed by a well-funded promotional campaign, and spreading like wildfire on social media. Within 4 hours, it had garnered over 2 million views. Major news networks began covering it, posing the question, is Maya Collins undermining public trust in law enforcement? At the same time, one of Maya's staff members at the DEA's Chicago field office was assaulted while wearing a shirt featuring the Reform campaign logo. Several DEA offices received anonymous threats. Maya knew the counterattack had begun. She called an emergency meeting with the DEA's leadership team that very day. Some members looked anxious. Maybe we should pull back from the media campaign. Perhaps it's time to stay quiet for a while. Maya stood. Her voice wasn't loud, but it was firm. If a fake video can make us tremble, then we were never worthy of the symbol of justice to begin with. I don't need everyone to agree with me. But if you're only here to protect your position, I'll go forward alone. Silence. Then a regional director spoke up, "You won't walk alone." Then another. And another. That afternoon, Maya held an urgent press conference. She publicly released the original footage, proving the edits, and demanded a federal investigation into the smear campaign. "We are not just facing wrongdoing," she said, "we are facing those who fear change. And I'm not here to comfort them. I'm here to defend what should have been protected all along, the truth." In that moment, Maya wasn't just the director of the DEA. She was a torch in the storm. 1 week after the counterattack press conference, Maya was in a virtual meeting with regional directors when she received an urgent call from Jordan. "You need to come immediately. Something's happened to your mother." Within 3 hours, Maya arrived at a local hospital in Baltimore. Her mother, Mrs. Ruby Collins, had been assaulted by a stranger on her way home from the market. She suffered no major physical injuries, but her emotional state was shaken. The attacker left a message, "Your daughter should stay quiet, or worse will come." The hospital room was sterile white, and Ruby trembled at the edge of the bed. Maya sat beside her, holding her mother's hand. "I'm sorry, Mom," she whispered, her voice cracking for the first time in weeks. "No," Ruby replied, her aging eyes clouded but still fierce. "Don't apologize for doing what's right. We only become afraid when we forget who we are." For the first time, Maya felt the full weight of being torn between two worlds, one of ideals, the other of loved ones she might be putting in harm's way. She sat in silence for hours, thinking. The next morning, Maya called an internal meeting at the DEA. "No press. No statements. They've crossed a line they never should have," she said. "But I won't answer with fear. I'll respond with strategy, with law, and with community." She announced a plan to create an independent investigative unit to track threats against public officials. Not just to protect herself, but to ensure no one else would have to face the same choice she had: stay silent to protect, or speak out and risk losing everything. As she stepped out of the meeting room, the looks from her team weren't just respectful. They were loyal. Not just to their leader, but to a growing ideal in the shadows: justice is not a luxury. It is something worth sacrificing for. 1 week after announcing the creation of the Independent Investigative Unit, Maya received an invitation to attend a closed-door hearing at the Executive Office of the President. No media. No public notice. But the meeting's contents had already been leaked. Senior advisors in the White House were concerned that the unilateral actions of the DEA director could create fractures within the federal government and threaten national security. One advisor said bluntly, "We don't need a symbol. We need stability." Maya entered the wood-paneled meeting room, bathed in soft golden light. For individuals sat opposite her, all-powerful. They didn't threaten her, they persuaded her, using the language of politics, statistics, risks, and the possibility of division. "Maya," one began, "if you move forward with this investigative unit, you'll be upsetting other departments. It sends the message that we don't trust each other." She replied calmly, "I trust those who act with responsibility. But I won't pretend to trust those who threaten my family and my staff." The air thickened. Another official interjected, "If you continue, you may find yourself isolated within your own government." Maya stood, slowly. "If I must choose between isolation and silence, I'll choose isolation. And if this government feels threatened by a unit meant to protect its own people from threats, the problem isn't me." The meeting ended in heavy silence. But outside, the unit had already begun receiving volunteer applications from agents across the country. They didn't need orders. They needed purpose. And Maya knew she was no longer alone. She was building a firewall, not just to defend against external enemies, but to cleanse the rot that had long festered within the system. In the first week after the Independent Investigative Unit was launched, Maya received the team's first report from the newly appointed lead, Agent Celeste Marlowe, a former FBI investigator known for her uncanny ability to trace patterns hidden in seemingly useless data. "We found overlaps between the threatening emails sent to DEA staff and a series of social media accounts used to spread disinformation during last year's election," Celeste reported. "The IPs are masked under multiple layers of encryption, but at least 3 access points come from government-issued devices." Maya sat silently for a moment. Then she said, "Dig deeper. If this is an organized effort, I want to know who's pulling the strings." 3 days later, the unit uncovered a chain of internal emails from another federal agency, emails used to forward doctored materials intended to discredit Maya. Among the senders was a surprising name, a close aide to the Deputy Director of the Department of Homeland Intelligence. The case was immediately referred to the Office of the Federal Inspector General. But Maya understood, every move from here on would be more dangerous. This was no longer personal. It was a battle to expose the shadows within the very walls that were meant to protect the people. In a follow-up internal meeting, Maya looked around the room. "If you're here to avoid turbulence, this is not the place for you. But if you want to rewrite how the system treats its own, then welcome to the front lines." And no one left. Not a single person. Each nod was a silent vow. Because they too were tired of bowing to what was wrong, and for the first time, they had a leader willing to shine a light where no one else dared to look. On Monday morning, the Independent Investigation Unit issued its first internal memo. A criminal investigation was underway into the abuse of power and the dissemination of disinformation from within the federal system. Though meant for internal circulation among law enforcement agencies, the memo leaked within 3 hours. The media pounced. Evening news led with headlines like, DEA Special Unit investigating fellow federal agencies. Phrases like administrative civil war and internal rebellion began to dominate headlines. At her office, Maya received a call from a veteran reporter at the New York Times. "I'm not asking who you're investigating. I'm asking this: are you about to turn this system upside down?" Maya paused, then replied, "I'm preparing to bring light to where there has never been light." Meanwhile, Celeste and her team made contact with an anonymous whistleblower, a tech specialist formerly involved in internal data handling at the Homeland Intelligence Agency. He agreed to provide internal records, but only under absolute protection. The data he handed over included one critical file, a list of smear campaigns divided by target and region, with Maya Collins listed as the top priority for neutralization. At the bottom, one name was printed as final approver, Deputy Director Marcus Ellison. Celeste forwarded the file to Maya with a single line, "We have confirmation." Maya read it, then forwarded the file to the U.S. Attorney General and the Office of Congressional Oversight. No comment. No press release. Just action. Later that afternoon, walking a long hallway inside the Justice Department, a reporter caught up with Maya and asked, "Do you think you're pushing your career to the edge?" Maya looked at him, smiled slightly. "I didn't come here to protect a career. I came here to protect a promise." That very night, major television networks began airing special segments. A stream of security experts and former government officials appeared on screen, questioning Maya Collins's true motives. One commented, "No one moves alone like this unless there's a political ambition behind it." On social media, anonymous accounts pushed narratives claiming Maya was planning to run for Senate, maybe even president. They called her an opportunist, an insider saboteur. Phrases like shadow queen of federal power and the dark core of the DEA spread widely. At a closed-door cabinet meeting, a national security advisor whispered to the president, "If we don't take control of this story, she will." What they didn't expect was that Maya wouldn't respond in the way they were used to. She didn't hold a press conference. She didn't speak on live TV. Instead, she publicly released all the non-classified files gathered by her investigation unit, emails, connection charts, technical forensics. In an unprecedented move, Maya announced the creation of a public platform, the Transparency System, where citizens, journalists, and oversight groups could access all open-source data related to the investigation. She wrote on the homepage, "If we demand transparency from those in power, we must be the first to offer it." The next morning, as Maya stepped out of DEA headquarters, a small crowd was waiting. They held no signs, neither in support nor in protest. They simply stood, quietly applauding. And Maya understood. She had crossed into a new phase, one where there was no longer a line between being an official and becoming a symbol. Within 72 hours of launching the Transparency System, site traffic surpassed 20 million. Independent journalists began analyzing the released data and uncovering internal records previously unseen, including documents related to procedural violations in internal surveillance, suppression of misconduct allegations, and suspicious fund transfers between agencies. Mainstream media had no choice but to catch up. CNN, The Washington Post, and even Fox News ran segments headlined, "Maya Collins's investigation doing what dozens of congressional committees couldn't." But not everyone was supportive. Several lawmakers fiercely opposed the initiative, accusing Maya of overreach and disrupting the balance of power. An emergency bill was introduced in Congress, aiming to dissolve the Independent Investigative Unit under the pretext of preventing administrative chaos. At a heated House session, one representative shouted, "We cannot allow one woman, however righteous, to bring down the entire machinery." Maya didn't respond. Instead, she continued doing the only thing she knew for certain was right, protecting the truth. Speaking at a forum at Stanford University, she said, "We don't fear the system, we fear being part of it and saying nothing. The system is not a wall, it's a mirror. And it's time we look into it." Thousands of students stood and applauded. That evening, a new message appeared on the homepage of the transparency system. We did not create the crisis. We simply turned on the light. And Maya knew the battle was no longer between her and the powerful. It was between darkness and light. The date was set, 9 a.m., Congressional Hearing Room. The topic, reassessing the legality and scope of the independent investigative unit founded by Maya Collins. Within the halls of power, it was dubbed the showdown for Maya's survival. From early morning, lines of reporters, students, and activists gathered outside the Capitol. Banners were raised, "Defending truth is never wrong." Maya arrived without bodyguards or a legal team. She wore a charcoal coat, her hair neatly tied back, carrying only a folder and a pen. On the other side, opposing lawmakers were ready, armed with sharp questions, veiled threats, and open mockery. The chair opened the session tensely. "We're not here to attack a person, but to define legal boundaries for what may become a dangerous precedent." A conservative senator asked, "Are you aware you're creating a model of unchecked authority, one that makes us fear a government within a government?" Maya calmly replied, "We're only investigating what deserves investigation. If fear of exposure is reason to ban inquiry, then the problem isn't us." Another lawmaker cut in, "Do you believe you have the right to make government documents public?" Maya looked directly at him. "I believe the people have a right to know. And if the government forgets that, we're no longer a democracy." The hearing stretched over 4 hours. It was broadcast live nationwide. Though no official ruling was announced that day, public opinion had clearly swung to Maya's side. Clips of her testimony went viral across social media. Universities hosted discussions centered on one question: should justice be the highest form of power? As Maya exited the building, the midday sun beamed down on her face. In that moment, she wasn't just a director. She was a reminder that some hearings aren't for judgment, but for the rebirth of a nation's values. 2 days after the hearing, Congress held a closed-door vote. The atmosphere in Washington felt suspended. On one side, those hoping justice would be upheld. On the other, forces determined to shut everything down before it went too far. Maya wasn't at the Capitol that day. She was in Baltimore, sitting beside her mother's hospital bed. Ruby was still recovering, and Maya knew, whatever the result today, she would continue tomorrow. That afternoon, the results were announced. The independent investigative unit, bolstered by overwhelming public support, was preserved, with a final vote of 216 to 204. A narrow victory, but a decisive one. The media erupted. Footage of DEA agents across various states celebrating aired nationwide. Many were in tears. Not because they had won, but because, for the first time, they saw justice wasn't silenced by power. Around the same time, Maya received a call from the Speaker of the House. "You've created a precedent. History will judge it. But today, we recognize it." That night, Maya sat alone in her office. She opened an old file, one long buried under layers of politics. She stared at it for a while, then laid it on her desk. One chapter of the battle was over. But the truth still had layers waiting to be unearthed. She stood, looking out at the city through her office window. And amidst the golden wash of light, she whispered, "Now it really begins." The file Maya opened that night was titled, "The Greenstone Case." A name once whispered within the DEA, then quietly erased from every official investigation nearly a decade ago. The victim was a young agent, Devin Reeves, who died during an operation under suspicious circumstances. The public record labeled it an occupational accident. But within the folder in Maya's hands were photos from the scene, previously classified internal memos, and one handwritten note from Devin himself. "I'm tracking a series of shady transactions, possibly tied to a high-ranking official. If I don't make it back, find the truth." Celeste was summoned that same night. "We're reopening this case," Maya said, placing the file on the table. "Not because it's about me, but because it's about why we ever started this." 3 days later, the team uncovered an email address involved in Devin's final correspondence, belonging to a former DEA supervisor now working for a private security firm with major contracts from the Department of Defense. The lead took Maya and her team to an abandoned site in Southern Virginia, marked as an old training facility, inactive for years. There, they discovered a partially burned data vault. Despite the damage, Celeste and her tech team salvaged part of the hard drive. Within were encrypted files, some labeled with one unmistakable name, White River. Maya stared at the project title, then turned to Celeste. "We've just opened the second door. And this time, no one can say we don't know what we're looking for." In her heart, only one thing was clear. The next chapter wouldn't be about responding to threats, it would be about striking first, into the very place where truth had long been buried. Maya left the meeting room in silence, carrying the folder labeled White River. She knew she was stepping into uncharted territory, a place where secrets weren't buried by accident, but because someone wanted them forgotten forever. On the drive back, her car passed a park where children were playing. Maya stopped and looked out the window. The sound of their laughter, pure and carefree, reminded her why she kept going. Not for power, not for glory, but for the generations who didn't yet know fear, who had never had to bow their heads. She picked up her familiar pen and wrote a single sentence on the back of the folder. "If we don't speak up, who will?" Then she closed the folder. Not to hide it, but to prepare it for the day it would be opened in the light, when truth would no longer be a threat, but a legacy. Because justice doesn't end in a courtroom. It begins with one person, willing to stand alone.